I spent years hiding, pretending to be someone I wasn't, until the night I looked in the mirror and saw the real me for the first time. The me I'd been afraid to show the world. What started as a secret experiment with makeup and a dress became a life-changing confession, and for the first time, I finally felt free. I never thought a single glance could fracture your world until that morning, staring into the cracked bathroom mirror, my reflection fragmented into pieces I didn't fully recognize. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from a gnawing, desperate yearning I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it didn't exist. My hands trembled as they hovered over the dresser, fingers brushing the edge of a soft navy blue dress I'd hidden under old sweaters, a secret stitched into the seams of my life. It smelled faintly of lavender, a scent that belonged to someone I wanted to become. Every fiber seemed to whisper, "This is who you are." I could hear the muffled sounds of the city outside my apartment, life continuing in its indifferent rhythm, while I was suspended in a limbo between who I had to be and who I truly was. My reflection shifted in the cracked glass as I traced the jawline I had long thought was permanent, a line that suddenly looked too harsh, too rigid, a silent accusation. And then, the mirror seemed to soften around the edges, almost as if it understood, as if it knew what I hadn't yet allowed myself to admit. I didn't just want to crossdress, I wanted to become her. My fingers slid over the silky fabric, my heartbeat rising with each inch I unwrapped. It was ridiculous, this mix of fear and anticipation, yet intoxicating in a way I couldn't ignore. The thought of leaving the apartment, of walking outside as her, made my stomach churn with both terror and thrill. What if someone noticed? What if they laughed? What if I finally looked at myself and saw me for the first time? I sighed, a long, trembling exhale, and made my first commitment. Today, I would try. Not tomorrow. Not someday. Today. I pulled the dress over my head, letting the cool fabric brush against my skin, the sensation sending shivers that were neither entirely pleasant nor entirely frightening. My reflection was changing, little by little, a new silhouette forming over the old, like dawn slowly swallowing the night. As I adjusted the hem and smoothed down the fabric, I noticed a faint scar on my wrist catching the morning light. It was old, forgotten, a mark of past battles I hadn't yet forgiven myself for. And suddenly I understood. This wasn't just about a dress, or hair, or makeup. This was about claiming a self I had denied for too long. This was about survival, not vanity. My reflection now looked back at me with a fragile, questioning hope, the kind that quivers at the edge of possibility. I hesitated, almost too afraid to take the next step, and then I whispered to the mirror, I think I can be her." The words felt foreign, but liberating, like an old lock finally turning. In that moment, with the city humming indifferently around me, I realized that fear was only the first step toward something I had always longed to touch. I moved toward the vanity, my hands brushing over the scattered brushes and palettes as if touching them could summon courage. The makeup looked alien to me, a collection of colors and textures that promised transformation but demanded precision. My reflection wavered with uncertainty, yet there was a strange excitement curling in my chest, a fluttering that made my stomach both sink and soar at the same time. I started with the foundation, hesitating over each stroke as if I were painting a fragile new identity onto my skin. The brush felt heavy at first, but gradually it became an extension of my intention, blending away the edges of the old me. I caught sight of my eyes, sharp, skeptical, questioning, and thought about what they had seen all these years. A boy who smiled when he didn't feel like smiling, a mask that fit poorly and a secret that clawed at my ribs. Now, the eyes staring back were softer, luminous in a way that startled me. It was almost as if the mirror recognized something I had long ignored. Life was waiting beyond this hesitation. I reached for the eyeliner, my hands trembling slightly, and drew a tentative line along my eyelids. The motion was precise but intimate, almost like a conversation with myself, each stroke whispering, "Yes, you can. Yes, you are allowed." For a moment I paused, staring at the reflection of my own hands, and realized the transformation wasn't just external. Every movement, every careful adjustment of brush or hairpin was teaching me something about self-compassion, about daring to care for someone I had never acknowledged, myself. When I applied the mascara, the lashes seemed to lift my gaze, and with it, my confidence. I didn't just look different, I felt different, though fear still lingered at the edges like a persistent shadow. Would the world see me and laugh? Would friends, family, strangers recognize me and reject me? But beneath that fear, a stronger pulse of exhilaration surged, one that demanded to be felt, not silenced. Hair came next, my fingers running through the wig I had bought months ago but never dared to wear. As I adjusted it over my scalp, smoothing the curls and framing my face, the reflection began to look like someone I could imagine stepping into the sunlight, someone I could imagine being. The wig felt like armor, soft but empowering, a tangible symbol that the change I craved was no longer a dream, it was taking shape in reality. I tilted my head, studied the subtle contours of my jaw and cheeks now softened with careful shading, and allowed a small, almost incredulous smile. The mirror no longer reflected just a boy pretending, it reflected someone reborn, someone fragile yet unyielding, someone finally learning to exist on her own terms. I touched my cheek, tracing the curve with a reverence I had never given to my own body, whispering, "Finally, finally, you are here." And yet, even in that fragile triumph, the pulse of anxiety returned. Stepping outside would demand bravery I hadn't summoned yet, but the whisper in my chest grew stronger. "You are real. You are allowed." The dress, the makeup, the wig, they were not the entirety of the transformation, but the first tangible proof that I could exist as myself, fully and unapologetically. The mirror reflected a girl with trembling hands, beating heart, and a courage so quiet it nearly went unnoticed, yet that quiet courage was all I needed to take the next step. Today, I would leave the apartment. Today, I would begin the journey that had waited for years in the shadows. The door handle felt impossibly heavy in my hand, as if it carried the weight of every doubt I had ever felt. One deep breath, and I twisted it open. The hallway stretched before me, long and unfeeling, the echo of my own footsteps bouncing back like a question I didn't yet know how to answer. Each step toward the elevator was both liberation and terror. Liberation because I was moving into the world I had longed for, terror because the world would see me now. When the elevator doors slid open, I hesitated, glancing down at my dress, the soft sway of its fabric brushing my knees. For a moment, I felt like a shadow of myself, a character in someone else's story, yet beneath that fragility was a spark I hadn't felt in years. I belonged to this body, this reflection, this identity, even if the world hadn't agreed yet. The mirror in the elevator reflected me briefly, a girl with anxious eyes and trembling fingers, but she stood upright, shoulders slightly back, trying to claim her space. Stepping onto the street was like falling and catching myself at the same time. The sunlight struck my face, warm and indifferent, and for a moment I thought I could disappear in plain sight. People passed, oblivious, absorbed in their own lives, and I realized something surprising. No one immediately recognized the secret I had carried for so long. No one laughed. No one judged. I could breathe. I could exist. The wind teased the edges of my dress and wig, and I laughed quietly, a sound of disbelief and joy mingled together. It felt absurd, almost silly, yet completely necessary. Every step I took was a small act of defiance against the years I had spent hiding. Every glance I risked was a reclamation of the life I had denied myself. I felt alive in a way I hadn't dared to feel in years, as though the world was suddenly larger, richer, more expansive than the narrow corridors I had confined myself to. But fear was never far behind. Every glance from strangers, every whisper I imagined, made my stomach knot. What if someone I knew saw me? What if this fragile self I was building shattered the moment I returned to familiarity? I clenched my fists, grounding myself in the thrill and terror alike. Each heartbeat was a drum of courage, each breath a small victory. By the time I reached the park, a quiet refuge away from the city's rush, I sank onto a bench, hands trembling as I pressed them into my lap. The dress was soft against my thighs, the wig slightly askew, and my reflection in the mirrored surface of a nearby fountain startled me. There she was, the girl I had finally allowed myself to become, real and present. My eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of a strange, overwhelming relief. I was here. I had arrived, and it wasn't a dream. It was me. And yet, sitting there, the quiet thrill mingled with doubt. The journey had begun, but it was only the first step. The world outside was vast, unpredictable, and I was unarmed but alive. In that reflection on the water's surface, I saw not just a girl, but a promise, to myself, to this fragile new life, that I would continue. That I would keep moving, even if fear demanded I stop. Sitting on that park bench, I realized that the hardest part wasn't the reflection, the dress, or even the wig. It was the world outside, indifferent yet unavoidable. I watched people stroll past, laughing, walking dogs, talking on phones, and every interaction became a test I hadn't asked for. My hands fidgeted in my lap, twisting the fabric of my dress, as I wondered, could they see me? Could they see the real me beneath the surface? A little girl ran past, her laughter pure and unfiltered, and for a fleeting moment, I envied her freedom. I remembered a time when I had hidden in corners, pretending to be someone else, masking my every gesture. Now, here I was, trying to move naturally in the world as myself, yet feeling every pair of eyes as though they carried judgment. My chest tightened, but I reminded myself, every step forward was progress. Every breath drawn as her was a victory. I saw an elderly woman feeding pigeons on a nearby bench. Her eyes met mine briefly, curious but kind. She smiled. That smile, simple and unassuming, caused something deep inside me to stir. A warmth, a quiet reassurance. Maybe, just maybe, not everyone was a threat. Maybe some people would see me as I wanted to be seen, without ridicule, without rejection. The thought bolstered my courage, and I allowed myself a small, tentative smile in return. I walked slowly along the path, each step deliberate, noticing how the fabric of my dress swayed, how the sunlight caught the highlights in my wig. I could hear my own breathing, steadying, and the subtle rhythm of my heartbeat. It felt like music, a soundtrack to this first act of my new life. A man jogging past glanced in my direction, indifferent, and I felt a flicker of exhilaration. I could do this. I was doing this. A flock of birds took flight, their wings beating the air above me, and I realized the metaphor wasn't subtle. Freedom wasn't given. It had to be claimed. And here I was, trembling, anxious, terrified, yet claiming it with every careful motion. Each person I passed was a small negotiation between fear and authenticity, and for the first time in my life, authenticity was winning more often than fear. But doubt lingered, insidious. What if I stumbled? What if someone recognized me and mocked the courage I was summoning? I squeezed my hands into fists, forcing my body to remember the strength that had gotten me here, that had carried me past mirrors, makeup, and trembling steps out the door. The journey wasn't about perfection, it was about presence, being seen as myself, even when my voice shook, even when my hands quivered. And as I continued walking, my reflection in the window of a nearby cafe caught my eye. There she was again, the girl I had finally allowed to exist. Her eyes were wide with cautious hope, her lips slightly parted in an almost imperceptible smile. I whispered to her, softly, almost like a prayer, "Keep going. You're doing fine." I found myself hesitating at the edge of a small cafe, drawn by the warmth spilling from its windows. The scent of coffee and baked goods was comforting, yet my nerves tightened as I contemplated stepping inside. Every instinct told me to retreat, to hide, to return to the safety of my apartment. But something deeper, the quiet insistence of the girl in the mirror, the one I had finally allowed to breathe, urged me forward. Pushing the door open, a small bell chimed, and suddenly I was acutely aware of every movement, every detail. My dress swayed against my knees, the wig slightly askew from the breeze, fingers twitching nervously around the strap of my bag. People glanced up, but no one mocked, no one stared in judgment. The world felt both enormous and oddly forgiving. I chose a corner table, close enough to watch but far enough to feel hidden, and sat down. The menu felt alien in my hands, a simple object that suddenly carried weight. As I ordered, the barista looked at me and smiled warmly, asking my name in the kindest, most casual tone. Something inside me untangled, the tension in my shoulders eased, my breath slowed. It was the first acknowledgement of my presence, not as a secret, not as a performance, but as someone real. I sipped my coffee and felt a warmth spread through me, a mingling of relief and pride. Here I was, existing, and it was okay. The reflection of myself in the glass of the window across from my table caught my eye. She was smiling now, more confident, though still tinged with nervousness. I caught myself whispering, "You made it this far. Keep going." A young woman sitting nearby glanced at me briefly and offered a friendly nod. My stomach fluttered. I wanted to respond, to engage, but the words felt tangled in my throat. Still, the nod alone was enough, a silent validation, a gentle reminder that I could occupy space without fear. My heart swelled in a way that felt dangerous and wonderful all at once. Outside, the city carried on, unaware of my small triumphs. And yet, in that little cafe, amidst the quiet hum of conversation and clinking cups, I felt something fragile but undeniable, acceptance, even if it was just my own first step toward it. I realized the transformation wasn't merely cosmetic. It wasn't the dress, the wig, or the makeup. It was the courage to exist fully, to claim myself one hesitant, trembling step at a time. As I finished my coffee, I glanced at the mirror behind the counter. The girl staring back seemed almost fearless, a version of me I had only ever dreamed of meeting. And for the first time, I believed that one day, maybe soon, she wouldn't have to be fragile at all. She could be strong. She could be unashamed. She could be me. The bell above the cafe door chimed again, and my heart jumped. A young man with tousled hair and a kind smile walked in, carrying a sketchbook. He scanned the room and, by chance or fate, chose the table next to mine. I felt my pulse quicken. Small interactions had become monumental, like stepping onto a stage I wasn't sure I belonged on. He settled down, pulling out a pencil, and began to sketch, seemingly oblivious to the world around him. I watched his hands move over the paper with an ease I envied, the effortless confidence I yearned to feel in my own skin. For a moment, I imagined reaching out, saying hello, risking a small connection. My fingers twitched nervously, but then he looked up and smiled, catching my gaze. "Your dress is really nice," he said casually, and my chest constricted with a strange mix of relief and disbelief. No hesitation, no judgment, just a simple compliment. My lips parted, and I felt a nervous laugh escape. Thank you," I managed, voice trembling slightly but real. He nodded, returning to his sketchbook, and I realized something astonishing. I could speak. I could exist in this world, even under scrutiny, and still be met with kindness. Every anxious thought, every imagined ridicule, felt suddenly hollow against the simple truth that someone had seen me and chosen to respond with humanity. I shifted slightly in my seat, adjusting my dress, and felt a warmth spread from my chest to my fingertips. The world outside could still be harsh, but this small, unplanned interaction became a beacon. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't a secret anymore. I was real, and the possibility of connection existed. For the first time, I allowed myself to relax, just a little. The coffee cup in my hands felt solid and grounding, a small anchor in a sea of uncertainty. And as I stole glances at the young man sketching beside me, I thought about the mirrors I had faced that morning. How different it felt now, not staring at a reflection, but looking at the world and seeing that the world might, somehow, see me back. A quiet joy rose in me, mingled with a lingering shiver of fear. Every step, every small act of courage, was adding up. The dress, the makeup, the wig, they were tools, yes, but the real transformation was happening inside. I was becoming someone who could inhabit this space, this life, without apology. And that, more than anything else, made my heart ache with exhilaration. I left the cafe with a tentative spring in my step, the city streets buzzing around me like a living current. For the first few blocks, everything felt surreal. Light, laughter, the way the wind toyed with my dress. And then, a group of teenagers passed by, their whispers slicing through the air like sharp little knives. One of them snickered just a little too loudly, eyes darting in my direction. My stomach tightened, and I felt that old familiar weight settle on my shoulders. For a moment, I froze, heart hammering, imagining every insult, every mocking glance they might be directing at me. But then I remembered the girl in the mirror from the morning, the one who had faced the world with trembling hands yet refused to retreat. I squared my shoulders, lifted my chin slightly, and kept walking. The whispers followed, fading behind me, but their echo lingered in my mind. Fear had not vanished. It never would entirely. Yet each step I took despite it, each breath drawn without hiding, became a quiet act of rebellion against the years I had spent shrinking myself. The city felt bigger, yes, but I felt bigger too, expanding into a version of myself I had long denied. I passed a small boutique and paused, compelled to look in the window. My reflection stared back, slightly distorted by the glass, yet undeniably me. Hair perfectly styled, dress swaying softly with the motion of the street, eyes wide but resolute. I reached out, almost touching the glass, as if to anchor myself in the reality that I was allowed to be seen. That someone, somewhere, even if it was just me, was finally recognizing me. And then a passerby offered me a warm, unexpected smile. My chest loosened. The city was not one note of judgment or fear, it was a symphony of fleeting kindness, opportunity, and risk. Every encounter, every glance, carried possibility, even if tinged with tension. I walked further, heart still racing but with a quiet undercurrent of pride. Each footstep on the pavement became a declaration. I exist. I am here. I am allowed. And as I rounded the corner, I caught sight of a park bench, empty and inviting, bathed in sunlight. Sitting there, I realized something profound. Transformation was not merely about the dress, the wig, or the makeup. It was about daring to step into the world, in all its uncertainty, as myself, and refusing to shrink back. I sank onto the sunlit bench, letting the warmth seep into my shoulders, my fingers brushing the fabric of my dress. The city hummed around me, people moving like waves, oblivious to the small drama unfolding on a single park bench. And yet, for the first time, I felt anchored, not just by the bench or the sunlight, but by something inside me that had been hidden for too long, a quiet, steadfast sense of self. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the breeze tease my hair, feeling the subtle weight of the wig against my scalp. It was comforting, yes, but it was more than that. It was a reminder that I had taken ownership of something that had terrified me, something that had been denied for years. Every trembling step, every whispered encouragement to myself, had led to this fragile yet unshakable moment. A small child ran past, chasing a butterfly, and I caught myself smiling. Their joy was effortless, unguarded, and it struck a chord deep within me. How long had I hidden? How long had I been afraid to move freely in the world, afraid to take up space, afraid to be? The reflection in my mind's eye was no longer the cautious boy who had once stared into cracked mirrors. It was a girl who dared to walk into the sunlight, who dared to breathe, who dared to exist. I opened my eyes and noticed a woman nearby, sketching in a small notebook. Her presence was quiet, serene, and I felt an inexplicable kinship with her, two strangers connected by something invisible yet palpable. I wanted to speak, to break the silence, to affirm that I was real, that I belonged. But words weren't necessary. Simply existing here, fully present, was affirmation enough. The recurring motif of the mirror from earlier returned to me, not the literal mirror, but the symbolic one, the reflection of the self I had nurtured inside. I realized the journey wasn't about perfection, about flawless hair, or dress, or makeup. It was about alignment, the internal and external finally meeting. And that alignment, however tentative, however fragile, was triumph. I exhaled, long and steady, letting the tension in my chest unravel. I had faced the streets, the public gaze, the whispering voices, and still I had remained intact. More than intact, I had grown. The girl in the mirror smiled back at me from within, not with arrogance, but with quiet, resolute pride. I was her. I was allowed to be her. I lingered on the bench a little longer, letting the sunlight drape over me, when a voice broke through my thoughts. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help noticing your dress. It's beautiful." My heart lurched, sudden and sharp, and I turned toward the speaker. A young woman, carrying a sketchpad and a satchel, smiled warmly, her eyes gentle and curious. I blinked, startled by the genuine kindness, my fingers tightening slightly around the hem of my dress. "Oh, thank you," I managed, my voice soft but steady. The words felt like a bridge connecting me to the world outside my self-imposed isolation. For a fleeting moment, I feared she might judge, or worse, dismiss me, but her warmth was steady, reassuring, unthreatening. She sat on the bench beside me, careful not to crowd, and we began talking. Not about me, not about appearances, not about what terrified me, but about small, ordinary things: the weather, the city, art. Each word exchanged chipped away at the lingering fear inside me, reinforcing that I could exist authentically and still be met with kindness. Every glance she offered, every smile, was a subtle validation I hadn't expected, yet desperately needed. Her sketchpad rested on her lap, and she offered to draw the scene: the park, the birds, the sunlight, and I noticed the way she glanced up at me, occasionally including me in the frame. I felt a flush of vulnerability, yet there was no judgment. Only recognition. Only presence. The mirror motif of the day returned in my mind, and for the first time, it wasn't just a reflection of myself I was seeing. I was reflected in someone else's perception, and it was affirming, not shattering. We laughed lightly over a shared observation, and I realized something profound: acceptance wasn't a distant ideal. It could exist in fleeting, unexpected encounters, in moments as simple as conversation, a smile, or the gentle attention of another human being. Each small affirmation was a lifeline, tying me to the reality I had dared to enter. For the first time that day, fear and doubt receded into the background, not gone, but quieted, giving room for something brighter: hope. I had stepped into the world as myself, faced invisible judgment, and discovered that courage could be met with gentleness. The girl I had nurtured in mirrors, in dresses, in whispered affirmations to myself, was now being recognized beyond as the afternoon sun began its slow descent, painting the city in amber and gold. I found myself walking toward a quiet street I had passed countless times without notice. Today, though, everything felt different. Each step carried the weight of acknowledgement, of existence. I stopped in front of a shop window, and for a moment, I braced myself. The reflection that greeted me was no longer tentative. The girl staring back had presence, poise, and, most importantly, ownership of herself. I studied every detail: the gentle curve of my cheeks highlighted by subtle makeup, the careful arrangement of the wig, the way the dress flowed naturally with my movements. I reached out and traced the glass, almost touching her. "You're real," I whispered, voice trembling with awe. It was strange. This reflection was me, but it also felt like someone I had longed to meet, a version of myself I had only dreamed of existing in the world. For the first time, I didn't see fragility. I didn't see fear. I saw courage reflected back, and the realization struck me so sharply it almost took my breath away. I had finally become her. I had finally allowed myself to exist fully. Every secret I had buried, every hesitant glance in a cracked mirror, every night of self-doubt, all of it had led to this moment. A small breeze stirred the edges of my dress, and I let out a long, shaky breath. Tears pricked my eyes, not from sadness, but from relief and joy. 4 years, I had existed in halves, fragments, and shadows. Today, I felt whole. The reflection in the window wasn't a mask, it was a declaration. I belonged to myself. I was allowed to take up space, to breathe, to be seen. As I stepped away from the glass, I felt a surge of lightness, as if the city itself was welcoming me. Every glance, every passing figure, no longer carried only potential judgment. They were witnesses to something larger than appearances. They were silent affirmations that life could accommodate me exactly as I was. I laughed softly, a sound mingling relief, pride, and disbelief. The journey wasn't over. There would be challenges, stares, and moments of doubt, but for the first time, I believed I could face them. I had become the girl I had whispered to in the mirror, the one I had nurtured in. By the time I returned to my apartment, the city had shifted into evening hues, streetlights casting long, soft shadows across the sidewalks. I closed the door behind me, and for a moment, silence wrapped around me like a protective cloak. I sank onto the edge of my bed, still dressed, still glowing from the day's small victories and quiet triumphs. I traced my fingers along the folds of the dress, feeling its texture, its reality, and realized that it had become more than fabric. It was a vessel, a symbol of courage, of discovery, of the self I had long denied. Every step, every trembling motion outside, had cemented the truth I had only dared whisper in private. I am allowed to exist. I am allowed to be seen. I am allowed to be me. The mirror in my bedroom reflected me again, and this time, there was no hesitation in my gaze. I smiled fully, unreservedly, letting tears of relief slide down my cheeks. The girl who had started this journey hours ago, trembling and anxious, had transformed, not superficially, but profoundly. She had met fear and doubt and emerged intact, even radiant. I leaned closer to the mirror, speaking softly, almost like a vow. You are real. You are allowed. You are here, and this is yours. The reflection seemed to nod, not literally, but in spirit, a quiet acknowledgement that the day's journey had solidified something essential. This wasn't an experiment, a temporary escape, or a fleeting fantasy. It was life. My life. As night settled over the city, I felt a deep, resonant calm. The journey ahead would have challenges, whispers, and uncertainties, but tonight I could rest. I had crossed the threshold. From hiding to being. I had faced mirrors, streets, strangers, and my own fears, and I had survived, fully, authentically. I closed my eyes, letting exhaustion mingle with triumph. For the first time in years, I didn't feel fractured or divided. I felt whole. I felt her. Would you like to continue to the final part? Night had fully draped itself over the city, the hum of distant traffic a gentle lullaby. I stood before my bedroom mirror one last time, tracing the contours of my face with a reverence I had never afforded myself before. The reflection gazing back was no longer tentative, no longer searching. It was confident, quiet, complete. She was real. I was real. I ran my fingers along the soft fabric of the dress, the wig settling perfectly around my shoulders, and felt a surge of gratitude. Gratitude for the mirrors that had reflected my fears, the streets that had tested my courage, the strangers who had offered glimpses of acceptance. Each of them had led me here, to this exact moment, fully present in my own life. I whispered softly, almost a prayer, "Finally, finally, I can be me." The words felt sacred, heavy with years of secrecy and longing. I could feel the girl I had nurtured in shadows, in quiet moments of self-doubt, finally stretching, unfolding, and stepping fully into the light. For a long time I just stood there, letting the reflection affirm itself, letting the sense of wholeness sink deep into my bones. No longer fractured, no longer hiding. Every tear, every tremor, every anxious heartbeat of the day had led me to this, a simple, profound truth. I am allowed. I am real. I am her. And in that final moment, I realized something even more powerful. The mirror was never just glass. It was a symbol of every step I had taken to claim myself, every hesitant motion toward courage, every heartbeat of defiance against fear. And now, as I gazed at her, I saw not just a reflection, but a promise. A promise to continue, to live, to embrace the person I had always been. I smiled, fully, completely, letting the tears fall freely. Tonight, The world outside could wait. Tonight I existed fully and unapologetically in the life I had finally dared to claim. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole.